So, hello everyone, my name is Ayana Johnson. I am from the class of 93. Hashtag 93 love. I did inner city outreach while I was at PBHA and so many other programs. But before you introduce yourself, I just have to thank Greg Johnson because he was executive director when I was at Harvard. And he is the one who gave me, and there was a new fellowship coming out. I had decided that I wanted to be in education, and at the time when I announced it to my friends in Cabot House at dinner, they all told me I was crazy. They were like, "Oh my God, you don't come to Harvard to be a teacher, you're crazy." But he told me about Equity Free Fellowship. And I applied to Equity Green and I got it. And I have been in education ever since. So you were really pivotal in changing my life. So I applied, read through my stuff, and I am a school principal today. And I just for that. So that's the introduction myself.
Hi everyone, my name is Avik Chatterjee. I'm class of 2002. When I was at PBHA, I was involved in Peace Games, which now has spun off into its own thing, but also Alternative Spring Break, which is how I know Tim. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes.
Okay, so the PBHA Outstanding Alumni Award is presented each year to an alum who has embodied PBHA's principle of lifetime commitment to public service and inspiring others along the way. Honorees are nominated by their peers and selected by a committee of PBHA Alumni Association. Award winners advance the cause of social justice and have made a significant impact on the people around them and the constituents they serve. Outstanding alumni awardees embody the PBHA core values of love and compassion, stewardship, diversity, growth of people and learning, community building, and social justice even long after their time at PBHA. This year, we are so honored to celebrate my classmate, Dr. Tim McCarthy. So I'm going to share, I'm going off, y'all. I love this man. Again, you could say I'm biased because he is from my class. But first, a couple of reasons. One, because in all of his communication to our class, he always exudes love. And he puts hashtag 93 love on everything. And that is something that we need nowadays. The second reason why I love this man is because he's an educator, and I'm an educator. And when you're an educator, you want and dream so much for your students. And you just pray that everything that you're pouring into them, that is going to transfer throughout their lives. So when I came to Harvard, and this was, people didn't know this about me, it was secret then, but my dad dropped me off, and shortly after that, he was sent to prison. He was in prison my entire time at Harvard. He did not come to my graduation. My mother was struggling to feed my brothers and sisters while I was eating in Harvard dining room. And I struggled with that. And so I found PBH, and they became my family. I didn't have people sending me gift baskets. I didn't have any of that. And so I felt like I didn't fit in, like I was a misfit. And I heard that you are the Harvard mayor of misfits. That's why that every time I hear about the things that you're doing and saying to your students and how you inspire them, anytime I even, because of this position, I've met a lot of Harvard students, and if anybody that I've met that has come across you and they start raving about you, I'm like, I know him. He's in my class. And I'm just filled with so much pride because it makes me happy to know that in this environment, they have someone like you that can pour into them and help them to go out into the world and do what they're called to do and be brave in doing that. So that is why I love you, and I'm so honored to help give you this award.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for this opportunity. I realize that I've known Tim for more than half my life, and so it's a great honor to be able to speak and present the award. But I will say I was asked to speak to introduce Tim, and I feel like being asked to speak to introduce Tim is like being asked to give a musical tribute to Beyonce. It's kind of, anyone who's heard Tim speak, and you will admit if you haven't, it's kind of absurd to come up here and try to be like the big energetic speaker. But I'll do my best to bring to tell some stories and to warm you all up for him. So I first met Tim. I just have this very clear memory of it, him leaning back over the seat of one of those 15-passenger, PBHA vans. We were parked in a gas station on the way to Hinesville, Georgia, to rebuild a black church that had been burned down in an arson attack. That was part of my first time doing alternative spring break. The trip was amazing and transformative, as I think anyone who gets to spend any amount of time with him will say their time is. I have these very distinct memories of, actually I don't think I played, but watching people play basketball with him, and as Tim's parents just reminded me, him tearing his Achilles while doing that. But it was always a lot of fun. But one of the funny sort of ASB stories is that, so from the beginning, Tim for me was an alternative spring break guy, service guy, I'll talk a little bit more about that, how that inspired us. But after my time at Harvard and 2 years at Teacher America, I ended up at UNC for medical school. 2 years away from college, but ASB was still one of the most impactful events of my time here, and certainly the time with him. And so at UNC, I wanted to start an alternative spring break program there. So among my medical students, I recruited a group of folks. I interfaced with the National Coalition of Burned Churches, and we found a site, and we started organizing a trip. And I thought, okay, I'm going to reach out to the PBHA of UNC, I think it's called Apples, and ask them if they could provide any support. Maybe they have a van like PBHA does. And they said, well, it's interesting that you want to organize this trip because there's already a group organizing a trip on the undergrad side. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Who's organizing that trip? They're like, oh, it's this visiting fellow, Tim McCarthy. Unbeknownst to me, I knew Tim was there, but I didn't know that he was also organizing an ASB trip while I was also organizing the same ASB trip. We ended up joining forces and doing the trip together. It was super fun. I think, as many of you know, through those trips and in his role as a resident tutor and a professor teaching such classes as Protest Lit, Tim has inspired generations of Harvard students to pursue careers in service. These, what I think are still on Harvard's campus, alternative careers in the way that alternative spring break exists. Whether it's classmates of mine like Ben Cornell or Alex Strad who work in education, whether it's people like Ryan Downer who do civil rights law, people like myself, I work at Boston Clemente for the homeless here. But sadly, these careers in service still are the alternative at Harvard. And this is true despite headlines describing corporate scandals like McKinsey working to get more people addicted to opioids and tobacco, Goldman Sachs bribing foreign governments, yet working for either of those companies remains more the coveted norm at Harvard than doing the type of work that some of the others of us do. These contradictions are in plain sight, yet conveniently ignored by many. But without fail, it's Tim who's the one who points out these hypocrisies of the institution. And I think that's why Tim is receiving this award, and that's why he's such an inspiration to so many of us, because he walks that walk. His life and career have been a consistent beacon that while it may be challenging, a career in the service of others is a legitimate path forward for students here, and that's how it's inspired so many of us. So Tim, thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and congratulations on this much deserved award. Okay, as I present the award, there's one more piece I will say. So Tim is the adopted only son and grandson of public school teachers and factory workers. Timothy Patrick McCarthy has devoted his life to public service and social justice. During his time at Harvard College, he was active in the First Year Urban Program, the Housing and Development, Neighborhood Development Program, Big Brothers Big Sisters, and PBHA after-school programs. After graduation, he worked closely with the summer urban programs, served on the advisory board for YY, and was faculty director for the Alternative Spring Break Church Rebuilding Program, where he spent 15 years organizing hundreds of students through PBHA to help rebuild Black churches destroyed in racist arson attacks. A respected leader in the LGBTQ+ community, he was a founding member of Barack Obama's National LGBT Leadership Council and was part of the first ever LGBTQ delegation from the US to Palestine and Israel. He is also the Stanley Paterson Professor of American History and the academic co-director of the Boston Clemente Course in Dorchester, co-recipient of the 2015 National Humanities Medal. Dr. McCarthy graduated with honors in history and literature, earned his Ph.D. in history from Columbia University, and has taught on Harvard's faculty since 1998, where he has inspired generations of students to follow their calling and take action, including myself. Okay, with that, Tim, coming up, here's your award.
I usually don't need a microphone, but I'm gonna put it up there for those who need it, for me. So the first thing I want to say is to Ayana, 93 Love, my classmate, brilliant, beloved educator, and to Avik, the people's doctor. I promise both of you that I will return when you two get this award.
That's right.
But you have not yet. I'll be submitting nominations. Hopefully I'll get a read. Anyway, you two deserve this. So many people in this room deserve this award. Literally everyone. I'm looking out at this room filled with family. Literally my family, my mom and my dad, my husband, my children's family, my neighbors, the man, the mayor who married my husband and me in the courtyard at Quincy House, 3 executive directors, the course of generations, staff, students, generations, multiple generations. It's extraordinary. It does feel like a big family reunion, and it's beautiful. And it also is so interesting that this takes place, and I think fitting that this takes place on the weekend where we also award the Coles Award and have the Coles Lecture. Robert Coles was the person I wanted to be when I grew up. Talk more about him in a second. And Loretta Ross, like who else could address us in this moment in that way? And it was so good to see that sister again after 10 years. I haven't seen her in a decade. She's been up to some interesting good things, and now is recognized as the genius that she has always been. So it's great to be here in this kind of homecoming from Phillips Brooks House Association, which is a home, and a place where all of us have learned to become family and to do the work that we all do in the world. When I think about the calling of service and of social justice, which are to me not distinct things, these are deeply interrelated things, I'll talk about that in a second. I think about the values that guide us and gird us, especially in those times when we're tested and we're struggling, the relationships that we build along the way, and the work that we commit ourselves to, guided by those values with the people that we form those relationships with in the world that is in such desperate need of transformation. When I think about values, I think certainly my mom, Michelle, and my dad, Coach Mac, themselves educators over many, many decades, who taught me all the essential things. They're the roots that gave me my wings, and they're still here. And they're right beside me, as they've always been. My parents, interestingly, my mom, if you get her a little later, will tell you a funny story about my Harvard application. We nearly committed a crime to get another question, another conversation. But my parents actually, there are two things that stand out to me about my folks when I was in high school, when I was a senior and I'd gotten into Harvard. At my high school graduation party, a whole bunch of folks were talking to my parents, oh my God, he's going to Harvard. I was only the second person from my big public high school to get in. And one of my cousins asked my parents, and I was within earshot of this, they said, Tom and Michelle, how on earth, because we weren't fancy people, we're not fancy people, how on earth can you afford to send Timmy to Harvard? And without missing a beat, I don't remember which one of you said this, but you both nodded. I said, how can we afford not to? And I thank God every day that you figured out how to do that. So they're the roots, they're the beginning of it all, but they taught me a lesson that was later voiced by Marian Wright Edelman, who was our class day speaker when I graduated, sat right behind her on stage in 1993 when she was our class day speaker for our class, so you ought to remember that. And she said that service, she was channeling Shirley Chisholm when she said, service is the rent we pay for living. Right, that was something that was so familiar to me, not because I had ever heard of Shirley Chisholm until I came to Harvard and studied African American history. I didn't even know who Marian Wright Edelman was until that moment. And then here are these two women channeling this value, this articulation of what it means to be in service to other folks. Right, which is something I learned from my folks a long, long time ago. And the other thing I remember about my parents, in addition to figuring out how to send me here and pay for it, no idea how that happened. My parents also, in the summer of my senior year, after my senior year, I graduated, I was coming, so they said, you know, you should apply to this pre-frosh program. We used to call it pre-frosh programs back in the day. And there were only two back then. It was the first year, well, it was the freshman urban program and the freshman outdoor program, so FUP and FOP. Now there's FIP and FAP and FOOP. But back in the day, there were two options, and I did not want to go to Harvard early. I was terrified to come here. This was a white-collar school. I was a blue-collar kid. I didn't think I was going to fit in. I thought I was going to fail out. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I didn't want to go. And my parents said, but we need you at the house. Because you see, Harvard starts later, at least back in the day, started much later than my friends' schools did, right? So like, they're like, get out of the house, we love you, but you can't get. And so my mom said, you're gonna apply, you should apply to FUP. It seems aligned with your values. I said, all right, you know, I'm not doing that. And she said, if you don't apply to FUP, we will apply for you to FUP. So that's how I got into FUP. I submitted that application, I did that. And when I think about how I was introduced to Harvard, it was through FUP. I showed up, the first thing I did was get out of the car and meet Sandy Dabowski, the award-winning documentary filmmaker, and Jared Barrios, the former state senator, who led the fight for LGBTQ rights and so many other things here in Massachusetts. These were the first two real, live, queer people I had ever met. I was like, oh, Lord, these are family, but I wasn't out yet. But I saw my future self in these two men who greeted me on that sidewalk in FUP. And then we did work together. That was the first thing I did. That was my entrance point, my portal into this place. And then, because of FUP, and because of the activism that those folks represented, I attended an anti-apartheid demonstration and became part of the South African Solidarity movement as a student. right? This is all before I moved into my dorm. And then the third thing I did was I took a flyer from some desk in Harvard Yard and it was like PBHA open house. And I came over to this place. All of these portals, FUP, the Student Solidarity Movement to liberate South Africa from the ravages of apartheid, and PBHA, the home away from home. That was how I got flowing here. And then through PBHA programs and FUP inspiration and the work that I was doing, I met a young man named Malcolm Green, little black kid, 4 years old, in a Head Start class, an after-school program. And he was in trouble the first day I got to school, the Maynard School, now the Maynard Fletcher School here in Cambridge. And I was supposed to be the person who oversaw his punishment. Not a good start for like a big white dude and a small black child in a public school in Cambridge. Like, what's this? What's going on here? So he hated me. We didn't even talk to each other. But then I came back and we got to know each other a little bit more. And then by the third time I came back to the school, he wanted to be my partner in gymnastics after school. And then the fourth time I came, his mother came to pick him up, Diane Jones. Lived across the street from the Maynard School, and she said to me, "Oh, you're Tim." She says, "Good to meet you. Malcolm's been talking about you for a couple of weeks now. I wanted to meet you." And I said, "Oh, he didn't like me at first. He didn't talk to me, barely talked to me the first day, the second day." And she said, "Well, that's because we wanted to know if you were going to come back." So we see a lot of people like you here in our community, in our home, and we always wait to see who comes back. And you came back. And when I think about that, like, I'm going to wait to see about you. I'm going to test you to come back. That has now become a value for me. Coming back over and over and over again. Coming back to the work, coming back to the communities, coming back to the people, coming back to the place. Right? That's what an Alumni Association is. We gather, we come back to this house that became a home that set us flowing to do that work. I think about how important that is. And I also think because of this work, because of Phillips Brooks House, I was introduced to Professor Coles. And I came in here wanting to study economics and government and go to law school and run for office and marry my high school girlfriend. Right? She was homecoming queen, and now all my friends from high school are like, now we really know who the homecoming queen is. But I took Robert Coles' Literature and Social Reflection course, which became the model for my American Protest Literature course, in the fall of my junior year, as I was starting to study African American history and politics, as I was starting to study history and literature, as I was doing more activism, I stopped playing sports, I began immersed in the community, started doing more and more of this kind of work, and Robert Coles' course introduced me to all of this literature. Ralph Ellison and James Baldwin and Eudora Welty and Flannery O'Connor and all of these authors that became muses for me. And I wrote a paper on Flannery O'Connor, a short story by Flannery O'Connor. It was about my little brother Malcolm, who I was now with all the time in the Big Brother Big Sister program. Right? And my grandfather, my Irish grandfather, who was about to pass away. And it was about intergenerational relationships and interracial relationships and the ways in which these things can be fraught but also can be liberatory. And I wrote that paper, and the morning I went to turn that paper in, my grandfather passed. I found out that he had died. And so I hand wrote a coda on the paper I had printed out, on a dot matrix printer. You don't know what that is. And I gave it to a friend, and I said, I need you to turn this in for me. And they didn't turn it into my TF, they turned it into Professor Coles. In that moment with him, that to be a role model, to be visible, to live a life that is unorthodox and alternative, but persistent, is worth it when you have one shot at this. So he was a model, and he was the one who told me to go south. Diane said you came back, and Robert Coles said go south. He said, if you're a white boy who cares as much as you seem to care about these issues, you will never understand race, racism, or racial justice in America unless you spend time in the South. The reason why we did those ASP trips all those years was because Robert Coles told me to go south. And so we did. And we did. All of us. Hundreds of us. And that's the thing about this work. It can't be done alone. It shouldn't be done alone. It's not individual. It's collective. It's hard, but it's about community. Loretta Ross talked about this. Enough with the me. Let's get to the we. We can't do this alone. And when I think about all these relationships that I can see in front of me right now, all the relationships that we've built in Cambridge, Boston, right? All over the South, in so many places, all over the world, the peaceful army of public servants and social justice folks who have flown from and flowed from this house that we call a home. It's extraordinary. And to be part of that, peaceful collective that's doing this work, it's all about those relationships. It's all about the relationships that we have. And I will say, for me, the way that I try to live my life sometimes gets lonely. Sometimes you are a party of one, table of one, voice of one. And that's no fun, especially in a place like this, which does not always appreciate those voices of dissent. And yet we persist. We must. But it's those relationships in the work, because of the work, for the work, that allow us to not feel every day the long loneliness that Dorothy Day described, that Robert Coles talked about in A Literature of Social Reflection. I don't need to tell anybody in this room how tough a time this is. We are living in a world under siege. Democratic institutions and governments are under siege. We got way too many folks without health insurance, way too many folks incarcerated. We have a racial justice problem, we have a climate crisis problem, we have a democracy problem, we have a gender problem, we have a rights problem, we have a hate problem, we have a fear problem, we got all sorts of problems. And it can be overwhelming when you're committed to this work to face that all the time. But I'm a historian. One of the good things about being a historian is that it humbles you. And it also forces you to zoom out and to dig deep. History is at its root the study of change over time. And so often when I think about how we see all of these crises in the world, it can be very despairing, it can be paralyzing. And you can get a sense that nothing has changed. I hear this all the time from young folks. I even hear it from old folks. That nothing's changed, and that's not true. To say that nothing has changed is to deny what history is, change over time. To say that nothing has changed is to deny and disrespect the work of the elders and the ancestors and the people who have come before us. The Robert Coleses and the Loretta Rosses in the class of 1972 and Brother Godfrey. To say that nothing has changed is to deny the work, the struggle that previous generations have done so that we can join them in our time and make use of our time so that we then can pass it on to another generation, the rising generations, to continue that work. And so when you are a historian and you can zoom out and dig deep, you start to realize that I am playing my part, our part, in the moment in history in which we are lucky to live and blessed to do that work. And we need to step into that history, realizing that change is not inevitable or irreversible, but it is true, and it is what we have to fight for. And we do. Folks in this room do that all the time. Martin Luther King famously talked about how the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, but not, always as fast as we might like it. And he, of course, was paraphrasing, like Mary Wright Edelman was paraphrasing Shirley Chisholm. Martin Luther King was paraphrasing the great Reverend Parker, my friend Richard Parker's ancestor, Theodore Parker, a great radical abolitionist who, along with some other fancy folks from Boston, funded John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. Deep history, deep history. The arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, and that we, each of us, in our moment in history, must step into that history to become change agents in our own right, each of us, individually, but all of us collectively bending that, because it bends more quickly and it bends more strongly in the direction of justice if more of us are invested and involved in the work. And the thing about Phillips Brooks House, the thing about this house that is a home, is that it gives us a joyful reason to come back, to keep coming back, to come back to this place, to come back to these people. come back to those values and to come back to the work. And it also always tells us to go forth, to get out, to go back into the communities and the places that we love, the people that we've come to love, and to do the work that absolutely needs to happen. And so when I think about this award, which I can't even tell you how much this means to me, Lord, but I share this award. I share this award with my parents. I share this award with my husband, my chosen family, with Malcolm and Diane and Tiffany, with Malia, my niece, with Robert Coles, with Ruby Bridges, with Richard Parker, Robin Parker, Theodore Parker, Frederick Douglass, and all the people, Shirley Chisholm, Mary Madonna, and everybody. I share this award with all of those people who have done this work long before I was ever blessed to be here for this time. And the legacy of all that work together, what we do, will be the thing that we pass on. So that change will always be possible, even if it's tough. And this time is tough. But we're ready, because we do this, because we know how. And we do it with love. I love you all. Thank you.